Oh, goody.
Alright, what's going on everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Mercenaries video. This one is a little bit different. So, what we are doing today is we're taking a look at some custom Mercenaries. I was kind of inspired to do this by Mullahoo. He came up with a really cool Mercenary design for Kael'thas Sunstrider, and I watched him kind of reveal that on stream. Spent a lot of time putting it together, put a lot of thought into it. And it was really sweet, so I talked with him a little bit about how he put that together, figured out how to do that myself, and made one of my own. And then our third co-host of the Fighting Pit podcast, WizardBeast, also had a really cool idea as well. And so I figured, for this video, we're going to take a look at a custom mercenary that each one of us designed. So it's funny, actually, WizardBeast ended up going with a Deathwing mercenary, and he did this before we actually got the new drop on Thursday, so we had no idea Deathwing was coming. So it'll be kind of cool to see, what he came up with, and you can kind of directly compare it to what we ended up getting for Deathwing. Yeah. So we're going to get right into it, but before we do, if you enjoy the Mercenaries content, do remember to like and subscribe. There's a ton to help out the channel and keeps the videos coming. So we're going to get into it here. We're going to start with Mullahoo's Mercenary, as he is the one who kind of inspired us to do this. So I figured it would be fitting to start with his. And as previously mentioned, he did Kael'thas Sunstrider. So this is a really cool character that I would love to see get, made into a mercenary. We have seen him in Constructed, and it would be cool to see him added here as well. So Kael'thas is a protector unit of Blood Elf. These are max stats here for all the mercenaries. So his max stats are 9 attack and 80 health. And he is kind of a hybrid of arcane and fire. So his first ability here, Arcane Disruption, arcane spell, 1 speed, 0 cooldown, remove all buffs, debuffs, and bonus text on a mercenary until the beginning of the next turn. So this is a really cool one. Obviously, it kind of needs to be fast to get this off, but we've talked about the idea of a silence effect on, just getting a mercenary with a silence that can shut off items, that can shut off buffs or debuffs or any of that other text that gets added on from other effects. And I think I'd really love to see something like that added to the game. So this is a cool way of providing that, and it's not like a permanent debuff or anything like that. It only lasts until the beginning of the next turn, so that's kind of a trade-off for it being so fast and not having a cooldown. Then, this is probably my favorite ability, and one we've also talked about before. If you know Pokemon, this will give you kind of a flashback to Trick Room. But this is Gravity Lapse, another arcane ability. This one is 5 speed, 0 cooldown, and says, reverse the speed of all abilities for the next 2 turns. 10 is the fastest, 0 is the slowest. So I am confident we're going to see something like this down the line in Mercenaries. I just really think, they draw a lot of ideas and inspiration from some of the other stuff we've seen in Pokemon, like Longjin's swap ability was a ability in Pokemon as well. And, there have been a lot of comparisons between Mercenaries, PvP, and Pokemon in a lot of ways. So it is cool to see an effect like this in there. And it is one I really, really want to see added. This is also an arcane ability. I think in its current form, this might be a little bit overpowered. I don't really know how I would change it, because this is one of those ones where you can't really change it too much, or it just doesn't really have the impact that it needs to. And by having 5 speed, you can still get stuff off before it goes off, so you can kind of play around it a little bit. But I really want an effect like this in the game, and hopefully we'll see one. And then last ability here, Pyroblast, 10 speed, 2 cooldown, fire spell, deal 50 damage to an enemy. So this is kind of the big payoff and reward. You may notice that his other 2 abilities literally don't do any kind of damage. So I think the reason this ability is the reason this ability is as powerful as it is in terms of damage, and obviously this would be very powerful with the speed buff from the kind of Gravity Lapse Trick Room effect, it has 2 cooldown, so you're probably only getting this ability off once, and then, you know, your Kael'thas is probably going to die unless you have a good way to protect it. And even if it doesn't, then you have to wait another 2 turns, which is like a century in Mercenaries. 2 turns is a very, very long time in this mode. But those are the abilities here. Getting into the items, we have Verdant Spears. Battlecry, gain 3 stacks of Verdant Spheres. Each time Kael'thas takes damage, consume a sphere and deal 10 damage in return. This is really cool. I like how it gives a way of kind of dealing damage by taking damage, since Kael'thas doesn't have a way of dealing regular damage every turn. It's kind of a nice alternative for that, so I do like that, and it does feel very much on theme, as do the rest of the abilities. Then we have Spell Shield. Battlecry, gain a Spell Shield that nullifies the first enemy ability that would affect this Merc. Really cool. Really like this one. I think it's a very interesting kind of counterplay mechanic, but also something the opponent could try and play around by using a weaker ability like Cookie Snipe or something before they want to target it with their more powerful ability. And then last but not least, Ashes of Alar. Battlecry, summon Alar. So this is the one thing that we don't have an actual like token thing for, but I did have some ideas for this one. I'd be curious to hear what you guys think would be cool ideas for this summon. I figured going with the Phoenix theme, it would make sense. So Battlecry, you know, you summon Alar. I figured it would be like much like the other summons, you know, somewhere between 10 and 15 attack and 20, 25 health or somewhere around there. But in going with the Phoenix theme, it should have fire abilities that it can use, kind of like Belinda's Fire Elemental. So it'd be cool if it had like a ranged fire attack and then could just attack in regularly. And being on theme with the Phoenix, it would be sweet if it had a death rattle where it was like the first time this unit dies, resummon it. Because as we know, Phoenixes have a tendency to resurrect and not stay dead that first time. So I think that would be a very thematic and interesting way to add that effect to the token. But I'm curious, you know, if you have any ideas for that, let me know in the comments. But that is Kael'thas. This is the one that Mullahoo created. Really like the design. Very interesting. And shout out to him again for kind of inspiring us to take the plunge and give this a shot. So that's Kael'thas. Really cool. We are going to move on to the next one here. This is actually the one I made. And if you have tuned into the podcast or some of the streams I've been doing, you know I want more Murloc support. Murlocs are a tribe that is really underused and underpowered like demons, and I feel that a little support would go a long way for them. I don't think this character on his own would be enough to give Murlocs what they need, but if you got maybe a cool Murloc protector or something, 1 or 2 more good Murlocs, maybe the addition of this would also push them over the edge a bit. So the character I chose is Neptulon, King of the Sea. He is a 885 elemental caster, and I just love Neptulon. I still have a gold Neptulon from back when he was, you know, a playable card in Standard. He was never really great there, but I always loved the art, and I always loved the theme, and how, you know, he gave you all these Murlocs and stuff, so it just felt like a natural choice for a Murloc support unit that didn't necessarily have to be a Murloc himself. So getting into the abilities here, I didn't give these any type. However, if we ever get like a water spell ability, I would say that pretty much all his abilities here would be water spells, but that isn't something that's been added to the game yet, so I didn't really think to add it. But if we do get one, then that is something that these abilities would be, because he obviously is kind of the water elemental lord. So getting into his abilities here, first ability is Aqua Blast, 5 speed, 0 cooldown, deal 10 damage, gains +5 damage for each friendly Murloc. So 10 damage, you know, it's a pretty regular baseline for a lot of skills, especially ones that can target. However, kind of supports having multiple Murlocs, and once we get into his equipment, we'll see there are additional support aspects there, which I think are pretty cool. Ability number 2 is Crushing Torrent, 6 speed, 1 cooldown, deal 8 damage to all enemies, repeat for each friendly Murloc. So again, another kind of decent AoE, relatively low on the damage side, but it gets pumped up by having additional Murlocs. So again, you're really incentivized to have Murlocs out with Neptulon. And then last but not least, we have Rockpool Reckoning, 4 speed, 2 cooldown. Deal 15 damage to a random enemy. Repeat for each friendly Murloc that died this game. So obviously we have abilities that are ramping up for having Murlocs, so I thought it would be fitting that the last ability here can deal a ton of damage if your Murlocs have died, and being on 2 cooldown, I think that does help balance it a bit, because 15 damage is a lot of damage, especially when you're like hitting a red, that'd be critting for 30, and we've all seen the power of repeat effects, notably from Localar, so I think this is a really cool one, and a way to incentivize the Murloc stuff, but make it so it's not all about having Murlocs alive on the board. You can also get a benefit for if they eventually die. And getting into the equipment here, first equipment, Anti-Freeze Amulet. Neptulon, friendly Murlocs, and elementals cannot be frozen. So I know a common point of frustration for many players, myself included, in the last meta was the prevalence of Frost Valera, and just how, you steal so many games by freezing your opponent's stuff with the Elemental and Cold Snap and all that. And though there are counters and stuff that exist, we don't have too many of them. So I really like the idea of another character that can provide an answer to some of these Frost things. But obviously, Neptulon is a Water Lord. He is not, a Fire Lord like Rag, so it didn't feel thematic to me to make it so he could just prevent freezing altogether. Instead, I thought it made more sense to kind of help boost the tribes that he is relevant with, so he can protect himself, because obviously he's the Lord of Water, and, ice freezing is just frozen water. So I think that makes sense. He can protect Murlocs, because that's kind of the tribe he's all focused about, and they thrive in the water. And then elementals, I think, also made sense because he's obviously an elemental himself. So I thought that was an interesting way to give a little bit more protection against freeze and stuff without it just being a blanket freezing can't happen like Rag, because that feels more of a unique ability to Rag, and I don't think it would have had the same flavor with Neptulon. And I think all of us really tried to keep flavor in mind making these mercenaries. It wasn't just about slapping some abilities that we thought were cool or powerful into one merc. It was also about, making it so they fit with the lore. Definitely Kael'thas felt pretty grounded in that. I think I did an alright job with Neptulon here. And when we get to Deathwing, I think WizardBeast did a great job with that as well. But second ability, Swim with the Fishes. Passive, all Murlocs gain +5/+5 and have immune to critical damage. So this one I think could be really funny, because you may notice all is in caps there, and that would mean opponent's Murlocs. So with the recent drop, and we did make these before the new drop came out, but with the recent drop, we've actually seen a little bit of something like this in how I think it is Nefarian's skill 2 can actually steal attack from enemy dragons. So I really like the idea of a passive here that impacts other characters, not just necessarily friendly ones. And it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because it's obviously going to buff up your Murlocs to make them stronger, but if your opponent is running Murlocs, they're going to get a buff too. And if they're running Neptulon, then you're both going to get the buff from both Neptulons, and you're just going to have some really big Murlocs, and it'd be fun to watch them kind of crash into each other. So I really like that one. Swim with the Fishes would be a lot of fun. And then last but not least, we have Fishy Friends, Battlecry, summon 2 5/20 Murlocs with gain 5 attack for each other friendly Murloc. So we gave them a smaller attack total here, because obviously they're going to be scaling up with the other Murlocs, but it just felt kind of fitting to have a Murloc that actually summons a Murloc when it enters. We do have Murlocs that can summon Murlocs, but none of them that have like a battle cry like Rexar does, or not Rexar, like King Mukla does, where he can just enter, or Belinda. So since so many of his abilities revolve around Murlocs, I thought it was only fitting that we let him summon some, and because it kind of fits with the lore of especially the card in Hearthstone where he gives you more Murlocs to your hand, I think it just kind of makes sense there. And I always loved the Murloc War Leader, which is actually the art for this one, and so it made sense for those Murlocs to be Murlocs that kind of scale up other Murlocs, because that's what Murlocs are all about. Like, they're all about the weird synergy and buffs and all that stuff, and I thought that was a fun way to do it. So yeah, that is Neptulon. Very curious what everyone thinks about that. And then we'll move on to our last one here. This one was made by WizardBeast. This is Deathwing, and obviously we got a Deathwing, so you can kind of compare this to that if you'd like. But really cool design. I actually love what WizardBeast did here, and he actually got pretty close with the stats to the legitimate Deathwing, which is pretty cool. So Deathwing is a protector, dragon, 10 attack, 85 health, and his abilities here. All right, so first up we have Death's Bite, 5 speed, 0 cooldown, attack an enemy. They are 3 speed slower until end of next turn. Definitely like this, makes sense, just a solid attack that can give a little bit of speed control. Always like seeing that. Ability number 2, Molten Flames. It's a fire ability with 2 speed, 0 cooldown. Deal 10 damage to an enemy. Either choose, if damaged this turn, deal 5 to all enemies, or if not damaged this turn, deal 15 to all enemies at the start of next turn. This is really cool. We've seen a few choose one abilities, like with Belinda, kind of, where you have an option, and I really like this. This is kind of like Long Jin in a way, where you can kind of mind games your opponent a bit. So if Deathwing takes damage, they get punished for it, or if they try and play around it by not damaging him, they can punish it by, or they can get punished by you choosing the other one. So I think that leads to some really cool mind games, and I think that adds some very fun elements to the PvP. And then last ability here is Cataclysm. So 5 speed, 1 cooldown, deal 10 damage to all enemies. Next turn, characters can only target characters across from them. Fire spell. I really like the design of this ability. I think interesting, limiting things like this will lead to some kind of wacky and interesting moments in gameplay that you wouldn't traditionally see. And this is also something that impacts board positioning. You know, there are various abilities that matter depending on where you are on the board. Illidan, Brukan Chain Lightning, that kind of stuff. And unlike traditional Hearthstone, there's not one correct way to play around certain things, because sometimes playing around one ability makes it worse against another ability. So I really like the design of this, and I think it is something that'd be very cool to see in PvP. Then getting into the equipments here, Adamantium Armor, passive, plus 35 health. After taking 50 damage this game, take critical damage for the rest of this game. So that's a really cool ability, and I think kind of fits with Deathwing lore-wise. He gets to be super big and powerful, but once you whittle him down enough, he's a lot weaker and susceptible to more damage. So that's pretty neat. Like that quite a bit. Then Flight. This one is probably, I think, the coolest ability. Start of the game, fly into the air, and land at the end of turn 4. Upon landing, deal 10 damage to all enemies. So I talked with WizardBeast a little bit about what this ability actually does, because it was a little bit unclear to me. And basically what he said is, depending on where Deathwing is, no matter if he's a lead or if he's on the bench, the start of the game, he flies into the air, and he is not usable until he comes down automatically on turn 4. So because of this, you would not want to lead with Deathwing with this equipment on, because you would basically just start with 2 mercenaries as you would fly up in the start of the game. So this would be kind of a bench ability, but it's cool because 4 turns is actually a lot in mercenaries. Usually a lot happens in those first 2-3 turns. So I like that this equipment kind of gives you a way of just slamming a merc onto the board. And he did confirm that the way this works, you know, you could have this happen if there are already 3 Mercs out. So that's a really cool design. I think it's really interesting. And you get that, you know, he smacks into the board, deals 10 to all enemies. Really like that. Maybe this might be a little bit overpowered if it were in the actual game, because 4v3 would be probably a little bit busted. But we'd have to see it and mess around with it to really be sure. But I do like the creativity and the flavor on something like this. I think it's really cool seeing different design abilities like this. And then lastly, we have World Breaker, Death Rattle, cast Cataclysm 5, and enemy characters are not allowed to swap positions until end of next turn. So that's really cool. Another kind of way to get that Cataclysm effect off when he dies, and also makes it so that the units are kind of stuck in place and they can't move around to try and play around it and stuff, or play around other things. I really like all of this stuff on the design. I think he did a really great job with this one. And it's cool that we actually got Deathwing in the game, because now you can look at this and look at the Deathwing we got, and we can see, you know, how close they compare and where they differ, and that's really sweet. So those are all the custom mercenaries for today. If you are interested in more of these, I definitely recommend joining the Mercenaries Discord. I will have a link to that in the description, and people actually have a bunch of custom mercenary builds there. There's a whole channel for it, so if you want to scroll through them, people have made some cool things like Ziliax and Dr. Boom and a bunch of others. So if you want to check that out, I'll leave a link there, and I'll also leave a link in the description to the program that actually lets you make these custom mercs. It's pretty simple, but it's very effective, and once you learn how to use it, once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy to do. Had a lot of fun with this though. Shout out again to Mullahoo for kind of inspiring both of us to do this. It was really fun kind of digging into the lore and thinking about the game and the different ways we could make mercenaries that kind of fit some of these iconic characters. But that's going to do it for this one. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, do remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.